Hey there, it's Renessa Bully Lane, and I want to welcome you to another conversation on creating your perfect work. If you follow me, then you know I'm all about equipping you to discover, design, and get highly paid doing work you love, whether that means radically changing careers, launching a business, or bringing your big idea to life. So we're in the middle of a 7-day series on overcoming the overwhelm and overcoming the busyness and creating the time, space, and focus you need to get highly paid doing work you love. And there are so many things I did wrong in my business. I mean, there's lots of things I did right, but there's so many things I did wrong. And the wrong pieces and the pain of those mistakes, most of them have so much to do with what we're talking about in this series. And so today's conversation is about less. It's about doing a lot less of a lot of things. And so if you are overwhelmed with work, life, and everything in between, this conversation is going to be like a cool glass of water on a nice summer day. And so Donna is actually, I'm going to introduce Donna McGeorge in a moment, but Donna is in Australia. So she is enjoying those nice summer hot days. And I'm here in the States. And so our weather is kind of reversed, but the whole bottom line is that this is going to be a refreshing conversation for you. And, you know, the challenge that I find with a lot of time management systems is that they're very, they feel very perfect world in their framework, which is funny coming from the perfect work woman, but it's perfect world in the sense that it can sometimes be hard to apply in the real world with so many disruptions and so many other people who have control of our time and such. And so we're left not knowing, what do we put into our schedule in our lives? What do we take out of it? How can we really, really get what we want? That all ends today, because this dynamic woman who is sharing the screen with me is none other than Donna McGeorge. And Donna is author of 10 books and publications, including the book that we're going to be talking about a little bit today called One Day Refund, Take Back Your Time, Spend It Wisely. Donna believes that it's about time we get off the vicious cycle of being out of control, overwhelmed, and at risk of failing at the things that matter most. She's worked with managers and leaders throughout Australia and Asia Pacific for over 20 years. She lives in the Gold Coast of Queensland, which is a region that is known for its world-class beaches and all of that great stuff. But her most creative moments come while sipping tea on her balcony, watching the waterway with her husband and her dog. And so I share that with you so that you can be inspired by how you can spend your time. And so with that being said, what I love about Donna is that she walks her talk. And who better to learn from than somebody who walks their talk? And you're going to be so blessed from the conversation today. So with that, I want to welcome you, Donna, and thank you so much for being a part of our show.
Thank you for having me on this amazing show. I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you today.
Perfect. Yeah. So with regard to the whole time management bit, and time management is the catch-all phrase that we'll use. It may or may not be the appropriate term. But how does what you talk about, the things we talk about with One Day Refund, the things we talk about with how to invest and make choices around owning our schedule and owning our calendars and having the lovely bits of life that are important to us, how does that play, especially in the running of your business? Because you've been really successful in your business. You work very lean. It's not like you've got this staff of, tens and, hundreds and whatnot. So you've got to be doing something really well in order to be able to have those kinds of results and still sip your tea on your waterway and your balcony with the dog and the husband. So
yep. Look, I think it's my word or my guiding principle, or whatever, if you want to call it that, is choice. And so I firmly believe in that I have choice, that we make choices, that I think it's important that people recognize that they have the ability to make choices. So I choose to do work I love with people I love the way that I want. That's a fundamental one. And so it's a really easy decision point to say, do they not fit that? Do they not fit those three? Then, there's a question. And in the words of the late, great Meatloaf, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I might be okay to do work I love with people I love if it's not the way that I want, or whatever combo of that. But I have also, look, it's really easy as a woman of 55 to say, now I recognize what's important, and now, and this is why I work the way I do. Because you probably, when I was 30, you might have been having a different conversation with me, because different things were important back then. But now my quality of life, being able to make choices, choosing how and when and with who I do my work, that really guides everything I do.
Perfect. So let's kind of dive in. So high achieving women in particular, we tend to pride ourselves in being able to operate at 120% at, at work, at home, at whatever, other endeavor we happen to be focused on in the moment in the marketplace. But before we get into the conversation around one-day refund, let's talk about the problem of operating at 120%, 100%. Oh, this phone never rings. That's odd. So let's talk about the problem of that before we even get into the solution on how to fix it.
The biggest problem is it's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is in the long term, you either burn out or you run out of steam or something breaks.
Something breaks.
Right? Something breaks. If you're thinking about, operating at 120 or 100 or 120%, I admire that. All power to you. I think it's amazing that people can, they go hard and they're enthusiastic and they're passionate and their work is really important to them. The thing that concerns me though is what's sustainable over time. And I'd rather have, particularly, as you say, the high-powered, high-achieving women be thinking about scale. Because when you think about scale, you think, well, if I want to operate at about 85% capacity, which is what I recommend, what do I need to do that? What do I need to get my weekends back? What do I need to get my evenings back? And that may be staff. I have had great business managers and assistants in the past who have helped me out. It's just that I've trimmed a little bit back further now that I don't need that so much. But it really is about what's the thing that my business, if I scaled, let's imagine that you're operating at 120 or 100% and your business doubled. Okay. How do you manage that? And because you just can't just go, okay, I'll do 200 or 240. Yeah. You have to really think about that. And for me, particularly as if you are the primary breadwinner, which is the case in many women's businesses, they often are, can be primary breadwinners. How do you maintain your level of energy and health to continue doing what it is you need to do? Yeah.
The thing that stood out to me when I was reading about kind of the 100% conundrum and folks operating at 100%, this conversation is all about creating your perfect work. And the idea that if you are creating the career, the business, the mission, whatever it is, that's a process. And for a lot of women, that focus on building that next thing, we give our last to that. We give the last of our energy. We give the last of our creativity. I've worked a full day at work and now I'm going to do the side hustle at home after work, after I've given the best of what I've got mentally and otherwise someplace else. And so there isn't really capacity, and we'll talk a little bit about capacity later. There isn't capacity to build the thing. There isn't capacity to grow. There isn't the capacity to pivot. There isn't the capacity to write the book because we're maxed out or we're over maxed. And so the first decision that we get to make is a decision around, am I willing to operate at a lesser level of hustle or lesser level of whatever? And so I think that kind of dovetails into what is a fundamental kind of teaching point for you. And that's this whole idea of operating at 85% capacity. And you talk about that, and One Day Refund is all about operating at 85% capacity. What I'd like to know is, what's the magic behind that number and why is it beneficial? Because I'd actually never heard of it. And I was like, oh, that seems arbitrary. So what's the magic behind the number and why is it beneficial?
That's hilarious. We've all heard the 80-20 rule, which I think is the Pareto principle. And, when I first started researching this, I thought maybe this is going to be another book about that. And then I started researching things like, well, first of all, it started with manufacturing, around when a manufacturing plant is looking at what is their optimal output. It is always operating their plant at about 85% capacity, because they have to leave 15% in case of, I don't know, maybe there's a downturn in the economy, people don't want so much stuff, or maybe there's a pandemic happens and all the supply chain stuff is messed up, you know, or maybe equipment malfunctions, or there's resource shortages. So when I looked at that, I thought, well, that's interesting. And yet, you know, manufacturing companies still make gazillions of dollars and et cetera, and they still operate really well. And then I was in a meeting live and in person, which is really rare these days. And I saw people helping themselves to cups of tea and coffee and stuff like that. And I was watching how people who filled their cup right up to the brim really had to walk slowly back to the table, and they were concentrating so hard on getting 100% of their coffee or tea back to the table. Whereas people that filled their cup and left about a 15% gap at the top, they were not only kind of chatting with people and waving their arms around and sipping their tea, and they weren't feeling a drop. And that's where I started to think, there's got to be something to this. Then I found examples in sport. You know, the USA's amazing Carl Lewis, he only ever ran his races at about 85% capacity. Then our very own Hugh Jackman, I found out when he was preparing for roles like Wolverine, which had very physical impact on him, he would only work out and operate at about 85% capacity. So all of that is to say, there is some science behind the number. Yeah. But what you talked about is where it really plays out. It's, you know, if we're needing to, look, we had to all pivot for the pandemic, but that's not to say we won't ever again. Most of us spend our time. The reason you're successful long-term in business is you do reinvent yourself from time to time. And knowing what you need to do to make that happen is what I'm talking about here. Is it writing a book, therefore make time for that? Is it doing podcasts or series like what you're doing now? And how do you create the capacity to think beyond the immediate? What could you be doing now that your future self will thank you for? That's another big message there. So that's kind of where the 15% came from. Got it.
You know, what I appreciate about this whole idea of adaptive capacity, which is what you call it, is that it's not just about hitting goals. Like, the conversation that we're having is not just about, did you write the book? Did you get promoted to vice president? Did you do the thing? Did you change the job? It's not just about the goal. A lot of it has to do with how you experience the journey. And because we could sit here and give you all kinds of time management strategies and planning and a system and a whatever. And then if you go and you take that system and you operate that system at 100 and 120%, you'll have the same level of frustration and burnout and overwhelm that you had before you had the system. And so the reason why I'm having this conversation with Donna is because I want to gift us all, and us meaning because I've read the book as well. I'm client number one, but I'd like to gift us all with the reframing of our mindset around how we think about time. And we're going to define it in a slightly different way, but I'll just talk as an example with the interview series. Like, Donna and I met because we're doing this interview series on kind of time management, but this is not my first summit. It's not my first interview series. And the first one that I did, it was wildly successful by whatever metric you want to use. Like, was it visibility or whatever? It was great. But I did everything. I was the web person. I was the admin. I was the marketer. Everything. And the entire process was so painful. And by the end, I was exhausted and done. And there were opportunity costs that could have been capitalized on afterwards that I did not have capacity to even take advantage of because I was so spent. Like, I was literally at 150% of capacity doing that. And so for a lot of us, we have ideas and dreams and goals, and we want to be great mothers and we want to be great whatevers, and we pack our lives to the brim without realizing that this impacts how you enjoy the thing, how you enjoy the 4-year-old's birthday party, or how you enjoy the vacation that you can't quite relax your mind around. Like, all of those things have everything to do with this 85% capacity that she's talking about. So even if it doesn't quite make sense, I want you to sit with it, because there could be some opportunities here to rethink how you think about managing your time and what you do and what you don't do. So in theory, this idea of 85% makes a lot of sense, right? But help me understand, practically speaking, and help the audience understand, practically speaking, how does this show up? Like, I get it if I need to leave 30 minutes earlier to get where I need to go to account for traffic or whatever. To me, I get it. But how does this play practically in people's careers and their businesses? What are examples of what it means to operate at 85%?
Well, the first thing, I mean, that you touched on in just what you were saying previously is, are you too busy to work with? So what happens if a new opportunity comes to you and you're so busy doing a 21 or a 7 or whatever day, summit, that someone says, oh, can I book some time with you to talk about this amazing opportunity? And you say, sure, and here's my calendar, and you're not available for 6 weeks because you're so packed. Now, by some measures, including my mother's, that's successful. She always asks me, are you busy? Are you booked out? And that's her measure of success. And for a lot of people, it has been for a while. So the first very practical thing you want to do you have room in your diary right now? If the most amazing opportunity landed, you've actually got the space and mental capacity, the space to think, to respond to a great opportunity straight up. And so if you were working with the 15% rule, you'd be saying, I leave in just over an hour, so 1.2 precisely hours in my diary per day that I do not do any meetings, that I just leave as a gap and it's protected. And by meetings, I mean not just your business as usual, right? You just don't accept stuff. So for me, I protect it from, I'm a coach, so I make sure I don't have any coaching times booked there. I don't accept webinar bookings or any training jobs. I always try to protect at least 1.2 hours in a day. Now, the worst that can happen, I guess, I don't really know what's worst or best here. The worst that can happen is you don't get the amazing call and you've suddenly got 1.2 hours sitting in your diary. And so, okay, what would you do with that? Now, a way I'd love you to think about it is, for those of you that do have absolutely back-to-back full diaries, what does it feel like when someone cancels at the last minute? When someone, you get this email that says, sorry, can we postpone? All of a sudden, you've got an hour in your diary. You go,
you're like, yes,
absolutely,
no worries.
And so what I want all of you to do is I want you to have that every day without having to be at the mercy of someone else cancelling it. So very practically, you protect an hour in your day that is the cancelled meeting time. And so what would you do in that time? You'd catch up on stuff. You'd get ahead of the curve on a proposal that you were, maybe going to do on the weekend instead. You'd get a presentation organised. You'd be able to, in your case, Renee, you'd be doing a bit of preparation maybe for something like this, pausing, thinking, breathing, to prepare yourself for whatever's happening. So it's not, I've had a manager say to me, so what do they do in that time? Do they just goof off? I'm like, no one ever has any spare time. No one ever goofs off. What they do is they shift their activity horizon. And so instead of working, I was working on everything that was due last week, and now I'm working on stuff that's due yesterday, and now I'm working on stuff that's due today or tomorrow. Suddenly I'm working on stuff that's due next week or the week after. And so that's one thing, protect your diary. But the other thing you might like to think about is also, practically defragging. Now, this comes from my old computer days, when in the olden days, you'd have to run a program on your computer because data used to be stored all over. If you imagine a CD style disk, stored all over. And then what would happen is once a month or so, you'd run a defrag, so it would condense all the data back together and create a whole bunch of free space. And so even things like, you don't do meetings before 10 or after 3. So you only do your meetings in the middle of the day. So you're protecting the before and after. That is a really practical way of getting back some of that space. And then finally, I think about what's sucking your energy. Even if we use the Pareto principle that I referred to earlier, according to that, 20% of your activity produces 80% of your return. What's that 20%? What are you spending your time doing? And so really thinking about disengaging from clients, relationships, activities or things that aren't giving you the appropriate return on that time, energy and attention.
Got it. There's something that I learned in the book, and it's the idea that time management has less to do with time itself, that time management is more a measure of capacity. and I want to read it exactly how you had it. You say that capacity is a product of time, energy, and attention. How do we measure or judge our capacity if we're using that definition? It was a powerful definition, and it has lots of applicability to me personally, but capacity is a product of time, energy, and attention. So if that's the case, how am I measuring my capacity?
Sure. So how do you feel at the end of the day? Are you exhausted? Is your fuse shortened? So you mentioned earlier that, you know, we may have our day job, we may have a side hustle, and some people may also have family. Yeah. And so when you get home from, or when you finish whatever it is you're doing, or one of your kids comes in and, or your partner or whatever, and comes in and says, hey, what's for dinner?
Yes.
How do you react in that moment? Isn't it the worst question? Now, it's the worst question because we don't have capacity. We've either used up all our energy, time, and attention thinking about a whole bunch of things. And so when someone says, what's for dinner, we just have not got the capacity to respond to that. And so we usually end up snapping some horrible comment to the most important people in our lives, right? And our kids run away scared, and our partner, you know, carefully backs away from the step away, you know. And so I'd say, you know, is your fuse shortening? And then the other thing I'd say is, you know, when it comes to attention, is really interesting. So I've had plenty of people. So I'm a great parent. I watch all my kids' sports. You know, I spend time with them on the weekends, and I'd say, well, are you spending time or are you giving them attention? Because you can sit next to your kid and watch telly with them and watch their favorite show, but are you sitting and scrolling your phone, so you're not giving them the attention? Is your attention wandering because your brain's just going a million miles an hour? And so I reckon kids could not care less about time, but holy cow, they care a lot about attention. And so for me, the real triggers are, am I snapping? Is my fuse really short? Am I forgetting things? Despite having a pretty, what I might call a productive or busy day, and I got a lot done, I'm still exhausted at the end. And then is when I'm trying to put my intention on other things, is my head constantly, you know, full of stuff? They would be the signs for me.
Yeah. I love this point. I want to park on it for a minute. I want to bring it home to the folks that are listening in, because you're listening in thinking about, well, how does time come into play with this big goal that I have, this idea, this perfect work that I want to create, right? And so all the things that Donna says around capacity and how it shows up and where the lack of capacity is, those are the signs. That's clear. What I took from this, you know, it was interesting. When I was in a season of burnout, it was hard to come to the realization that I simply couldn't do all that I wanted to do, or that I was accustomed to doing, because I had spent years operating at 100%. And the problem was I had the time. And I was like, well, because I have the time, I should be able to do this, right? I don't understand why I can't do it. I've got the time. I've freed up the time. But when I think about this from the idea of capacity, and capacity being a product of time, of energy, and of attention, I didn't have the energy. Like, I physically did not have the energy to do the thing. And so therefore my capacity was limited. And so for some of you, in fact, Donna and I met at a time when I was like, I'm launching this thing, and I'd like you on. And then I was like, I'm so sorry. I was so burnt. I'm healing. I can't do this. And she was gracious enough to be like, okay, when you're ready, you know, I'm on it. But it was the most challenging time for me because I'm so accustomed to just nail it. You set a deadline, you set the goal, like, go for it. But we can make deadlines about things, but if we don't have the capacity, the deadline means nothing. And it has nothing to do with you not being committed, or you not being hard charging, or you not being what you do not have the capacity to do it. And so for some of you listening in, you may need to take stock of what is your true capacity right now to do what you say you want to do. On the others, because you might have the time, but you may not have the energy. On the other bit of this, there's this idea of attention, right? And the biggest challenge that I see with women who come through my doors, you know, I'm brilliant at what do you want to be when you grow up at 42? Like, I'm brilliant. If that's your problem, I'm your chick. Brilliant at what's the strategy, brilliant at how do you monetize this? How do you position your value in the market and get paid? But the biggest challenge that I see with women is they come in and they've got all this stuff on their plate. And I remember one client in particular, she was a consultant. She worked on her own. She was a consultant for a utility company. And she wanted to do this amazing idea to help foster girls to really like succeed, like as they matriculate out of the foster care system to get into, the workplace and career and all that. And really, it's a beautiful idea. And she couldn't get it off the ground for nothing in the world. And it was because she had all these church responsibilities and all these other things that and these weren't like bake sale, raffle ticket response. Like she was doing proposals and raising money and doing all these kinds of things for the church because she had the skill set to do it. But this big audacious dream that she'd had for 30 years couldn't get off the ground because she didn't have the capacity. She thought it was time. It wasn't time. She had the time. She just filled her attention with so many different things that took up the time. And it was so frustrating to her. And then she kind of beat herself up and blah, blah, blah. It was a capacity issue. But when you look at it from that definition, then you can really take stock of where am I with this and what needs to shift with this in order for me to get what I want, because you might not have a time issue. You might just have an attention issue. You might have an energy issue, in which case your capacity might be diminished, but if it's strategic, you can still progress, right? But if you don't recognize you have an energy issue, then you keep charging, your capacity is going to diminish because physically you're now incapable, right? So there's all these different elements. But I thought it was beautiful. I parked there for a while, and I wanted to park here for you guys to bring it home and get you thinking about how you start to make decisions around what you do and what you don't do, because it really is a capacity issue. And I bravo for this point because it made the whole book for me. So
thank you. And just as we're talking, I'm just noticing, I think they're like mowing their lawn nearby. So I don't know whether you can hear that, but
I can't hear it.
Okay, good. I will just leave it
going. And if it
okay.
does, guess what? That's what you get.
So be it.
You can edit all that stuff. No worries.
You make such a great point, because I think sometimes we think if we only look at our capacity in terms of time, then we're missing two important pieces, right? And that explains why we think we've had the time, but we just still didn't end up doing the thing, or something broke. And the thing that always ends up getting broken, for want of a far better word, is usually it's the person that ends up broken in some way. Yeah. And so, outwardly everyone's going, oh my God, look at you doing all these amazing things. And inwardly you're like, yeah, but I'm dying here, right?
Yeah,
I'm just
literally
can't do it. So yeah.
Literally. So this kind of ushers us into a really important part of what's required to get the one-day refund. And this whole idea of one-day refund is getting this time back, right? And when I think on the surface, when I think about getting a one-day refund, I'm taking out stuff that then gives me more space. What I thought was beautiful about your book and the work is that the one-day refund, in order to get it, sometimes there's things we need to put in. There's more inputs we need to have in order to extract more out. And so it was very counterintuitive, but there were really 4 different areas that you talk about, 4 specific aspects that you talk about that we need to consider in order to give ourselves more capacity. It was thinking space, it was breathing space, living space, and working space. And I want us to actually kind of walk through each one of these because I think they're super important. And I think a lot of women are going to gain from how they think about their capacity. But let's start with thinking space. What is it about thinking space that's critical for expanding capacity?
Well, thinking space is our mental capacity. It falls into that category where, have I got the space to actually think about stuff? And so you hear people say it. They'll say, I haven't got any space to think. I don't have the bandwidth for this. This isn't working. Something, I just, and they do. If you look at me, they'll even use gestures like this. So they're like, my head is just so full. And so what we need to do when it comes to creating thinking space is literally empty our heads. And if we don't, I think I quote in the book a guy called David Allen who said, The human mind is for having ideas, not storing
them. Yeah.
Right. And I do think, your high achieving women that you described earlier, we try and carry a lot of stuff in our head, and you just can't. So if we don't clear up some of that thinking space, then we're never going to have the capacity. And by the way, it's like a domino effect. If I clear up thinking space, nearly by default, I'll get a bit more breathing, living and working, and vice versa. Any of the spaces will create more.
Yeah. What's beautiful about that, or at least an area that I know that for many years I was not good at, you think that you're creating thinking space because you're thinking, like you think that just because you're thinking about a lot of stuff, you think, well, I'm thinking, right? But the reality is it's just circulating. Like there's even with your to-do list and all of these other things, it's still it's home stuff, it's work stuff, it's what you have to do for your parents, what you have to do for your boss, like all these things. But this idea, ladies, of creating time and space in your calendar to think, like the whole purpose of the time is to think, and it has its own spot, that like you literally was like, okay, on Monday from 2 to 3, that's thinking time, or whatever it is that you want to call it. But you create the actual space to sit down and think about what's working, what's not working, what do I want, what are all these things that just need to get out of my head and have a home someplace, and then begin to organize it. It amazes me how many women do not do that. As successful as they are. I mean, they may have a project plan for the project that they're responsible for, or a marketing plan for their department or whatever. But when it truly comes to them and their lives and what they want and work in life, especially creating this big idea and all these other things, there's no time anywhere in a diary, in a calendar or anything where this was your time to think. It's so basic, but
it's so revolutionary, right?
So basic. Just because you're thinking doesn't mean that you have thinking space. It just means that you, right? And the reality is when you create that thinking space, then there's less time with all these random thoughts that take up room in your head. So when we want to start taking back time, you get to take back time, because now you're not wasting time with all the things that you think you've forgotten, or I need to remember and don't, because you've created the repository to be able to put all that out somewhere. I think it was powerful. The second space is.
Thank you.
Your second space is.
Oh, sorry. That was a question.
She was basking in the congratulations.
I was thinking, that's just so great. Thank you. That's lovely. Was I that smart? Wow. Okay, sorry. The second space.
Oh, stop it.
Oh no, I know. Is breathing space. Now this kind of falls into, again, it's the mental capacity, but it falls into the personal life of our, usually it's where people say, I just don't have any space to breathe. I'm being pulled in all directions. You said earlier, I have this great idea and I've got a lot of commitments, or a lot of things that I've said I'd do with church or family or the school or whatever it might be that I've committed to. And it's really hard to then find the capacity when I have all these commitments. And so the thing about breathing space is really about thinking about what could I disengage from or disconnect from that would then give me the space to devote it where I think it's most important. And this is a really tough one for women, because we carry a lot of expectations of ourselves, and there's a lot of expectations on us around it's almost like, sure, you can go do your business or your side hustle, but make sure you keep doing all those, womanly, motherly,
what's for dinner
things. What's for dinner? All that stuff. So it is. This is a tough one, because this is the one where you're going to probably make some tough choices about what you're going to let go. And so for you, it was going from a 21 episode piece to a 7 episode piece. So you let go 14 episodes in effect,
Yeah.
from your comments from previous time. It could be someone else saying, I'm going to withdraw from that church committee. I'm going to withdraw from one of my church committees, from the 15 that I'm on, right?
Yeah.
Or it might be that this year I'm not going to be as heavily involved in the I don't know what you call it. In America, we call it the P&C, Parents and Citizens.
Oh, PTA.
PTA, there you go.
Parent Teacher Association.
PTA. That's it. I'm not going to be as involved in the PTA this time. Or, you know, maybe this is not the year of the book. You know, maybe this is the year of just, you know, resting and exploring other things, but certainly it's not the year of the book. So this is really about recognizing what fills you with joy. Yeah. What are the things? So you'll know you've really nailed it with breathing space if you're feeling like everything that you're doing is joyful, is helping you be happier, is helping others around you be happier. Yeah.
That's the distinction about breathing space. And because breathing space isn't about, it's not just free time. Like it's not, oh, I have this free hour in my day. That's not breathing space. Breathing space is about filling that space with things that actually bring you joy, that actually light you up. It's not, okay, well, I have this hour, so instead of working on this project, I'm going to go and do something for my kid, blah, 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 unless that fills you with all of this amazing joy, right? And so I think that was the distinction. And it's funny because as I was going through a season of burnout at one point, and I'd engaged with this functional medicine doctors, and we're spending all this money on this, this clinic, and I'm sitting down with one of the nurses, and I'm expecting, like, you guys are about to give me the blue pill and we're gonna fix this because I got places to be and things to do, this body's slowing me down, right? And so she sits there and I'm expecting what's the supplement gonna be, what's the protocol, and she says, you really need more joy. And I'm like, are you for real? Are you for real?
Wait, what? What?
So that was her assignment until the next next appointment was to go and find 3 things that gave me joy. I was hot. Yeah, I was so mad at her.
And that's really interesting. So you give a high achiever an assignment. Go find 3 things that bring you joy. Right. I am going to find those things that bring me joy. Like, I'm just imagining the high achiever herring about the house or the shopping center or the world going, where's the joy? Where's the joy?
But what's so interesting is that for many of us, when we start thinking about overwhelm and busyness in our time, the last thing we have space for is what we deem to be frivolous. But the frivolous is actually essential. Like, this is an essential part of your strategic plan to nail the goal, to earn the revenue. It's like so essential. And so the reason we're having this conversation with Donna is because when you go off on your next whatever time management scheme, if you don't know that you need to build in breathing space, and that is essential for you to be able to run the marathon, you're not going to make it. And that's why this was so profound, because joy is critical to being at top of your game and creating the space for that. And so I thought, like, I'm all about what's 1 or 2 decisions you can make from what you learn. And one of the things that's really near and dear to me is connecting to girlfriends. And, and I'm an only child. I'm a military kid. So I resonated when you were talking about military, but I'm really good by myself. I'm really good by myself. I got a few personalities in my head and have all kinds of conversations and be totally fine. But I do have friends that are dear to me and I'm loyal to them, but we don't spend nearly enough time. We don't connect enough. And I'm like, that's important to me. That's breathing space for me. And you think, oh, well, when we get time, when our paths cross, one of our friends is in Spain. One is like that, your paths just don't cross. Like, and so I decided, I was like, one of the things that I'm doing for breathing space is that once a week, I have a time that's dedicated to connecting to my friends, which means that if I'm trying to connect with someone, we're not going all over trying to figure out the calendars. This is the time that works for me. How does that work for you? It's dedicated. Somebody's going to fill that spot. Why? Because it's breathing space, right? And so that little thing alone, the richness that comes from that connection that I haven't done in a really, really long time is priceless to then be able to get off that and go, slay the next dragon. It's a really, really important point. I thought it was really valuable.
Well, and there's piles of research to support it. They've said that, joyful people are more likely to be promoted. So joyful, happy people, they always work faster and more productively. And there was a study done in call centers that found that they make more calls, they convert more calls. But the really interesting thing is happy, joyful people, they don't work more to achieve their productivity. They work about the same, if not less, hours, and they still get a whole more stuff done because there's just something about it. And the interesting thing is, I think you'll be surprised at, and I don't mean to make this sound as Machiavellian as it does, but I also schedule catch-up talks, the calls with people who I really like to connect with. And I did one yesterday, and it started off as just a cup of tea. How you going? Have a chat. How's things? She says to me, how's business? I go, good. I tell her about a couple of projects. And then we both suddenly exploded into this creative conversation around ways in which I could leverage that new piece of work that I just picked up in about 10 different ways. And so that's kind of adaptive capacity. We made this space to have just a bit of a general yak, and all of a sudden an opportunity emerged out of that conversation that would never have happened if we hadn't both created space to have that catch up.
Absolutely. The third space that you say we must create is
living space.
Living space.
Living space. And this is starting to get into a bit of our physical capacity. Yeah. And it largely came about through the pandemic, where in Australia in particular, we had lots of periods of time where we were in full lockdown, where you had both working parents at home, kids doing their remote learning, all sorts of stuff. And so you had what was normally potentially an empty house during the day now was full of people 24/7. And so this became around, how do we get really conscious of the impact of our capacity on our space? So this can be everything from, when you look at your wardrobe, is it bursting at the seams? When you open your wardrobe, does it basically having to hold stuff back? When you open, we've all got those drawers in our kitchen, when we open the drawer in the kitchen and it's just full of stuff, and you're trying to find a battery for the remote control and you can't find it because it's buried in there somewhere. So this is physically, or even worse, you go out, you can never find your keys, you can never find your wallet or your purse, you can never find your sunglasses, and the kids, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden one of your kids says to you on the way to school, hey, I was meant to take a scale model of the solar system as a school project today, and boom, and there's all this. If your life always feels like it's hard, it's chaotic, there just never is the literally physical space, this is the one you want to pay attention to. And so reminding ourselves that there are spaces. So if we are working from home, if that's the nature now of your work, or you run your own business and so you do that from home, it's, do you have a dedicated space for that? That doesn't mean that you have to add an extension to your house or move to another house or whatever. It's just, it can be the kitchen table, but is it just a particular spot on the kitchen table, and that is your dedicated workspace, so it doesn't contaminate other spaces? So really thinking about, how do I declutter? How do I, design the spaces that I'm in? That's what we're talking about here.
Got it. You made mention in the book about friction, and I think this is a great way to think about your living space. Like, what are the things in your life that create friction for you? Like, friction could be, I can never find my keys, blah, blah. That's friction. For me, friction is, what am I going to wear today? Like, that question is friction for me. What's for dinner is friction. So when you think about the things that create friction, those are the places where you can create systems in your living life to take away the decision making from that. So if I do the 2-week meal plan or the 3-week meal plan, now for 3 weeks, guess what? I don't have to think about what's for dinner. We already know what's for dinner. When you go shopping for the week, you already know what you're shopping for, as opposed to I went shopping and then darn it, this thing I decided to make today, I don't have the ingredient for, and now blah, blah, blah. Now it's a whole hour and a half to try to make the dinner because there's this one fish oil that you don't have, that you must have for this, whatever. Those things create friction. So making some of those with your kids, what are they going to wear for the entire week? Decision made. There's no question in the morning about this or that, or where's the sock or which shoe. You've already made the decision. Those are things that create space that then you can either, have thinking space or breathing space or what works, whatever you need to do. That's how you think about delivery things. Do you need to have, things delivered to your home as opposed to you? And again, some of these things feel like privilege, but the fact is, they can save you time, sanity, and create the space that you need to be focused on building the work that you love, right?
I remember having a big epiphany about this a few years back when I worked out what I was charging per hour to my clients for what I did. And then I worked out per hour what I was spending on things that were full of friction and didn't add any value. And then I worked out that for less than my hourly rate, I could pay someone to do some of these things. And yes, it is privilege and not everyone's able to do it, but there is that moment where you go, I can create more space here and then it creates, adaptive capacity. If someone else is, if I order my groceries online, or I get something delivered, or I maybe get some help around the house or something like that, all of a sudden frees up that capacity. It's a big moment when you realize that.
Absolutely. And so then the last bit is working space. So tell us what that is and how that makes a difference for us.
This is around creating the capacity to get done the most important stuff. And so the three key areas I talk about in here are defining, being really clear on what is the work I do, what is the value I give, and how does it fit into the wider perspective. So put your work into perspective. So for people who their identity is very closely attached to their work and creating perfect work, that could, that sometimes means that I may put other things at risk, and it may even put myself at risk if, heaven forbid, I'm not perfect. What happens if my identity is really attached to that? So really making sure we're clear on what perfect work means.
Yes.
How does it serve my other stuff? Right? That's what becomes really important.
Yeah, it was interesting. There's a couple things that you said in that space about, we talked a little bit about fragmented work and creating the space to be able to actually do more of here's how I think about workspace, or what I took from it personally. Several years back, I figured out what my perfect work was. What's the thing that I felt that I was born to do? And yes, it was risky. And, there's lots of new things that come in with stepping into that space. But I knew that I was doing the work that I was supposed to do. However, I was doing a whole lot of other stuff that I wasn't supposed to do, but was necessary to make the work run, right? And so what I realized is that more of my time was spent on doing ancillary things that I really, I was the billing person and the web person and this and then that. And when you start out, you don't have the money to just outsource, or you think you don't have the money to just outsource. Sometimes you just don't have the leverage to recognize the trade-off that you're making, and that it's really much more valuable and you can be more successful if you just go ahead and do, outlay it. But the point is, I was doing so much more of other stuff than I was on the stuff that is really what I'm put on this earth to do. And I hadn't created the environment and the support system that would free me up to focus on giving my gift to the world. And I think what I took from working space is creating that for yourself. And so the delegating, that's why you delegate things, not because you're too good to do it, but because if you're doing that, then you can't do this. You can't write the book about your trauma that you overcame to then be able to help everyone else who has that problem to overcome it. Why? Because you're doing this other crap over here. And so the working space becomes, what are the things that I must take out of my sphere? Whether that's by delegating, whether it's by paying someone else to do it, whether it's by whatever means necessary, to then have more real working space. Like there's in another conversation in the series, one of the speakers, Grace Marshall, talks about this idea of real work versus fake work. A lot of us are doing fake work, and the fake work is important work, but it's not the work that we should be doing. And it's the thing that takes us away from really stepping into the greatness. It's fake work. The real work is the stuff that we don't have time to do. Part of my real work is taking care of myself, taking care of my body, having the capacity to serve the many women that I have the privilege of being able to walk alongside, because there's nothing for me more exciting than seeing someone out there doing what they were born to do, doing it at a high level and making a difference in the world because we were able to navigate this journey together. If I'm not well, I don't get to do that. So real work for me, and so you got to think about your working space in the sense as, what do I need to shift in order to laser this down? So for the client whose example that we were talking about earlier with all the church commitments, church is really important. It's important to me, all of that. But guess what? The real work was about those foster girls. That was the work. That was the thing. 30 years she had this idea. But if you don't create the working space, that thing dies. And so this other work is important, but somebody else can do that. There's somebody else for which that church work was the pinnacle of that was their dream. Your dream was the foster girls, and that got kicked to the curb.
That's actually really the point around delegation. A lot of people think it is, I'm just going to palm off this work to other people. It's just rubbish work that I don't want to do. But actually what you're doing you're creating the space for someone else's opportunity to level up, to learn, to be involved, to get visibility, whatever it might be. And so when you create the space for yourself to level up, which is a large part of what the working space is about, when you level up and then you're creating a vacuum for someone else to level up into. That's the real magic of that one.
Yeah. And the reality is, the person that you're delegating to, they might do it badly. They might do it worse than you initially, right?
Or better, or have
better.
Greater, right?
Better. Imagine that. They might. But the point is being willing to allow for that, so that you can do more of what you have decided is the gift that you want to bring to the marketplace, right? And so with that, again, the reason why I'm having this conversation, this wasn't a tactical, here's, how I time chunk, and those things are important, but there's some mindset shifts and some framing that needs to happen, so that then when you get your blank slate, designer life version 3.0, you get to put in what's needed for you then to take out the stuff that's not needed. And so my hope is that, especially these 4 areas around thinking space and breathing space and living space and working space, adaptive capacity, and what does your capacity look like in that function of time and energy and attention, like those things, you marinate on that for a while, like sit with it and see, what does that mean for me? And how do I make different decisions around how to utilize my time, so that then whatever system or planner or whatever I choose to use, now it's effective because it's aligned with who I want to be in the world and aligned with what I want to do in the marketplace. So with that, Donna, I know that you have a free gift for all of the folks that are listening in, and a way for them to stay connected to you. So share that gift as we prepare to close out.
Sure. I've actually got 2. I'm gonna. Okay. And this is just something that changed between when we first started talking about this. Now I have something called the capacity quiz, and it basically it's 10 short questions that assess which space might you need to put some attention on, and it does have some very practical to-dos in there. And the other thing is actually a very prescriptive way of carving up your day, which is based on my book, The First 2 Hours. And it's basically an interactive version of the book that's kind of like a mini course, but it has all the stuff, a few videos, and all the downloadable templates and tools and things like that. So I'll share those links with you for you to share with the
Awesome.
with the listeners and the viewers.
Yay. So as you'll see on Donna's page at the bottom, there'll be a place for you to click, enter your name, your email address, or whatever information is required. Get the download, get the stuff. Our stuff is good, especially if you're looking for the practicals and the tips and the tools. Like that's where you're going to get to take this conversation and then figure out, well, how do I apply that? And what does that mean? And what decision do I need to make? And what do I do with all of that? That's where, and it's free. So get it because it's free. And when you do that, you also get to stay connected to Donna. And that's really the beauty of it. So as she grows and as she evolves and as she continues to put great work into the marketplace, you get to be the first to know about that. So with that said, it's been a treasure to connect with you, and it's been lots of laughs, and it's been not long overdue. It happened at exactly the right time. It's just been long in coming. And so I'm definitely excited about that. And so on behalf of Donna and myself, we want to wish you all the best, wish you well, every success and happiness, and we will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.